Thank you, Senator Welch. Senator Hickenlooper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all of you. What a fascinating issue that, I mean, you look at some of the issues around the world, and this seems relatively small, and yet when you talk to constituents in any of our states, we see this is top of mind, something that drives people batty. I mean, just they can't function. Ms. Saunders, a number of cybersecurity experts have raised the issue of some companies functioning as consent farms. They're essentially tricking the consumers into, they may be browsing a website, but they're tricked into basically signing on to as a consent to receive robocalls. And first, I can't imagine how whether people actually intentionally would do that. I guess they must. Anyway, the FTC has launched investigations into companies who are behaving this way, acting as consent farms. And my question to you is, do you believe that stronger cybersecurity practices or clearer online disclosures would be sufficient and would be successful protections for consumers who obviously don't want to get the calls?
No, sir, I do not. I think that disclosures are unfortunately uniformly ineffective at protecting consumers. I think the problem needs to be that the rules need to be sufficiently clear that the sellers who are using the telemarketers to make these calls and benefiting from these calls will be much more careful which callers they employ to make the calls. Because if they're not careful, they will be zinged with a TCPA class action. And unfortunately, although I understand the frustration of the Chamber of Commerce with inappropriate class actions, at the moment, the danger of class actions is also one of the prime ways that incentivizes sellers and callers to comply with the law. So we want the law to be clear, and we want the law to create those incentives to comply with it.
Great. Mr. Rudolph, I would ask you, and this is off, my staff will chide me later, but I'm curious, it seems like there's a market there. This is so frustrating to people that for a relatively low monthly cost, lots of people, I think, would buy protection. In other words, does generative AI have the potential to really effectively protect people from these kinds of scammers?
Going back to the question you just asked Margot, I want to really reinforce the robocall operator who can use tens of thousands or millions of numbers to contact you. If you think about what we can do on a device, it's very easy to block an individual number. And whether it's not actually officially signaling to that company, hey, I've taken my consent back, but by blocking a single number, you're preventing it from communicating with you. If we can require companies, when you grant consent, to say, I'm granting consent to that one number, right? And if a bot granted it or you accidentally, unintentionally granted it, at least it was pinned to that one number, and you can control that caller originating from that one number and revoke that consent. So if we can just change how we change our policies about when you've got an entity and how many numbers it tries to rotate through to evade these tools that we have in our hand. You don't need generative AI. You just need to make sure that you pin robo-operations, robo-communications to using a number which matches their identity as they communicate that with you.
Interesting. Yeah, great. Ms. Brown, in your testimony, you described how businesses use automated messages to reach their customers. So when these bad actors flood an individual with robocalls, people lose their trust in answering the phone. The best example, I have my phone, if I were to call you, comes, it doesn't give my number because whether for whatever right or wrong reason, sometimes, rarely, a constituent or a journalist might decide they want to get a hold of me frequently. So I have, caller ID blocked. No one will take my call. So I have to send someone a text before they'll take my call because they think that that is always going to be a robocall. Whereas now the robo guys are so smart that they never use it anymore. I keep trying to convince even my family that they should accept blocked numbers, what they don't. Anyway, Ms. Brown, how would you think small businesses would benefit if we could reduce the volume of illegal or unwanted calls?
Thank you for the question. I think small businesses are victimized by fraudulent and illegal calls in much the same way that Ms. Saunders was talking about consumers at the front end. So I do think the steps Congress has taken to prevent caller ID spoofing, to try and clean up the ecosystem and some of the work that Josh and the Industry Traceback Group do is really important to try to instill or protect confidence in the calling ecosystem so people do want to pick up their phones. Small businesses both make calls and receive calls, and I think everyone is benefited if there can be trust that who's calling you is who it purports to be and not an overseas scammer, for example.
Yeah, the small businesses I know are irate because they have to take every call. And so they are the ones that are constantly distracted at certain times of the day when the robocalls are coming in waves. Anyway, thank you all for taking your time out of your busy schedules to be here. I yield back to the chair.